Hey, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Beyond the Breakers, a podcast about shipwrecks, loss, and lessons learned from maritime disasters. My name is Taylor, and as always, Tanner will be joining me today. But first, before we get started, let's thank a patron, a new patron at that. Thank you, Sam, for signing up. We truly hope you enjoy the Patreon content. We work hard to bring some good stuff on there. Check it out. Enjoy it. Let us know. Let us know what you want to see in the future. We appreciate you signing up. And with that out of the way, let's bring in Tanner. Tanner, how you doing?
I'm doing really well. How have you been?
Oh, pretty good. Can't complain. It's been a kind of a busy week, but a good kind of relaxing weekend and everything. So that's always nice. It's summer feels like it's here in Ohio. It's hot. It's like 85, 90 degrees most days.
Yeah, we've had some days in the 80s. I think today's our last really warm day until it cools down again, which is nice.
Yeah.
I don't like when it's like 60 degrees already at 7 in the morning.
Yeah, I feel like that's the one nice thing about living where you live is that like it does get hot, but you have a lot of good 60, 65 degree nights that cool off pretty nicely. So that's kind of the immediate what's going on here. But I don't know, as far as media stuff, I've actually gotten into baseball this week. I kind of got bitten by the baseball bug. I watched some of the Reds and Red Sox series. The Reds won 2 out of 3, so that was nice. But a lot of college baseball, too, with the College World Series going on. Mm-hmm. I feel like college baseball is a weird niche. Like, it's not generally popular, but like there's a lot of support for the top level program still.
I was watching some yesterday, and I don't watch that much. I was watching a few games because ECU was in it, and watching a little bit yesterday. And it's kind of like what we've talked about before with college basketball and professional basketball. But I feel like baseball, to even more of an extent, watching college baseball, you're much more likely to see exciting things happen on what should be routine plays.
Yeah, it is interesting that there's plays that are just, like you said, so routine in the MLB that can become an adventure. And there's a lot of talent disparity too, I feel like, between like the top probably 15 teams versus, some of the bottom teams.
Yeah, it's amazing to see also talent wise with pitching. If you've got a pitcher who can consistently locate, a 95 mile an hour fastball in college, like that's dominant pitcher. But, in the MLB, that's pretty average.
Right. Yeah, it's been fun. East Carolina's still in it. They're 1-1 in their pool, so they need to win today against Oklahoma again to keep going. But
Oklahoma again. Last time didn't go well for the Sooners.
No, I think it was 15-1 East Carolina. So we'll see. Hopefully that happens again today. But they lost 2-1 yesterday to the top seed in their bracket. We'll see. It's been fun. What about you? What are you up to?
I have been doing some reading. I'm about halfway through the book 1864.
Okay.
A few weeks or months ago on one of our media check-ins, I mentioned watching the series 1864 on the PBS streaming app. 1864 is a Danish series about the Second Schleswig War between Denmark and a alliance of Prussia and Austria.
I just assumed anything with a date in it like that is a Yellowstone production.
And it was a great series. It made me really super interested in Denmark and Danish history and the Danish language. But the series was based on a book. And so I'm reading that. The book is...
Has any non-Dane ever been like, God, this Danish history is so interesting?
I don't know. Probably. There may have been some Anglo-Saxons in the 800-900s who suddenly became interested in the history of Denmark.
Would you call yourself a Danophile?
Danophile, I guess, would be the name for it. And it's really interesting because, watching the series is very dramatized. You've got historical figures, but the main cast is kind of fictionalized agglomerations of people to represent.
So is it kind of the docudrama style?
It's not really a docudrama. It's just a straight up drama.
Okay.
There's no cutaways to historians or anything.
Okay, because that was really jarring in that Tsar one I watched, where you'd see Rasputin have, a sexual liaison with a peasant woman, and then it would cut to some stodgy historian talking, and it's like, High highs and low lows here.
I want more Rasputin orgies on screen. So yeah, the book is just more of a straight history, but it is presented in a very creative, kind of non-linear way. So it does make it an interesting read. It kind of starts with just before the end, assuming that anyone reading it kind of knows how it ends. So it teases a little bit of the end. It leads up to the climax, and then it takes you back to more of the background stuff. And it especially goes well with after reading that Bismarck biography, because this was kind of his first go round, his first real play on the European stage. Bismarck is looking for an excuse, basically, to start a war like this against a beatable opponent, and the Danes happen to give him a just gold-plated, perfect excuse to invade. There's a lot of dynastic and historical issues. Denmark makes a new constitution that's in violation of the London Protocol, and it gives Prussia and Austria this perfect excuse to invade and attack Denmark. It's a great story. It's kind of odd because like Denmark is most definitely in the wrong, but they're also the underdog. So you kind of feel very weird reading the history of it. It's a good book though. I'm definitely enjoying it.
It's so weird with like the documentary or like the televised productions of so many of these things, where it's kind of like I talked about with the Russian like royal family one. Everything is like Game of Thrones-ified. I watched a pirate series that was similar. Everything has to be like Game of Thrones now in history. And I like some of it, but then other times it's like, but we don't have to do this. Like we could just talk about the history.
The other interesting thing with that series and that time is the crossover of you have some very old Prussian officers in 1864 who got their first experience at the Battle of Leipzig against Napoleon. And they are interacting with very young officers who will be some of the minds that forge the Schlieffen Plan. So you get a lot of crossover because like Helmut von Moltke, the Elder, was kind of one of the masterminds of the plan for the invasion of Denmark. And then, of course, his nephew? I think is the one in World War I. And so, yeah, you see a lot of this crossover. You have the very old school traditionalist officers who they have ideas about what war should be like and what you should do. And you have the younger officers who are looking for more of a quick, you might call it a prototype of blitzkrieg or the Schlieffen Plan, this very quick, rapid encirclement that the older guys are kind of resistant to. It's a fascinating time in military history, certainly, and outside of that, just history in general.
For sure.
It's one of those potential flashpoints in world history that doesn't expand into something bigger because Britain basically acknowledges that Denmark is in the wrong, so they're not going to support them militarily. But if they'd chosen to do so, this could have been, World War I 50 years earlier.
Right.
So yeah, that's what I've been up to.
That sounds really interesting. It's a period of time and like a location that I don't know a lot about. Speaking of things getting invaded, let's talk about some water invading the inside of a ship. Let's talk about the Walk in the Water.
Excellent.
This is one when I told you we were doing, you said you'd actually heard of this one before.
Yeah, pretty much anything reading about steamboats or early Western expansion, she's usually name dropped as a pioneering steamboat. And then she sort of just disappears, and I didn't really know how her story ended.
Yeah, the story will actually kind of parallel the last one that I did, where this ship is kind of a celebrity and you kind of watch this like fall from grace, like a Hollywood starlet. A little shorter journey. We're not going all the way to Hawaii this time. Today, like I said, we're talking about the Walk in the Water, and she is a side wheel steamer. She's launched May 28th, 1818. So she's actually the first steamer launched on the Great Lakes.
Very cool.
Definitely like an early design, but this is something that kind of gets talked about as being like a critical piece of like the expansion that's going on at this time. She's launched in Black Rock, New York, which is now part of Buffalo. That's under the direction of Noah Brown and Harris Fulton. So, Buffalo's kind of booming as a lake port. It's not the Buffalo we know today that we kind of forget that exists until the Bills are good. Yeah, like Buffalo's like a booming port town.
And Cannibal Corpse.
Are they from Buffalo?
Kind of.
I did not know that. So she's owned by the Lake Erie Steamboat Company. As you'd expect, she's a pretty versatile vessel. She's expected to haul passengers and cargo. And again, all of this is like the boom region around the Great Lakes. Mm-hmm. So, they're hauling anything and everything plus people.
Yeah, you said it was under the direction of Noah Brown and Harris Fulton. I assume Harris Fulton is some relation to Robert Fulton.
I did not look it up, but I assumed the same thing because there can't be that many Fultons.
Fultons who are good with steamboats.
What was the other Fulton's name?
Robert is the celebrity Fulton.
Let's do a quick Google search to see what we can find.
Robert Fulton, who, if you remember from our Lusitania episodes when we talked about submarines, famously tried to sell his submarine idea to Napoleon.
I do not see a quick answer to this question, but one would have to assume they were at least familiar with each other.
Brother or cousin, something like that, probably.
Something like that. Everyone's related at this time, too.
Also, I assume that Noah Brown is the Ohio State standout Noah Brown.
Yes, it is definitely the same one. So the name supposedly has its roots in the native people's impression that steamboats moved or walked on the water without a sail. Other stories state that the vessel was actually named after a Native American chief. I find the first one to be a little too stereotypical, dare I say. I don't know.
I feel like anytime in history, because this happened a lot in like elementary school, and your teacher's like, "Oh, this is the Indian word for this." And I feel like anytime you start talking about, it's named after this Native American, or it's named because the Native Americans thought this, you could sort of instantly have to put on your skepticism shades just a little bit in American history.
Yeah,
white people like to make up things about Native Americans.
Yeah, I feel like that definitely is like a story that was kind of retconned in afterwards. It was probably named after the Native American chief. And it was just a more fun story to tell, to be like, yeah, they were so impressed. They had no clue that it was a boat.
Is it possible? Sure. Does it also fit the sort of like parochial view of the Native Americans? Yes.
So she's 132 feet long. She has a 32-foot beam and a 6.5-foot draft. So this is not a large vessel. She could accommodate around 100 cabin class passengers and, quote, a good number of steerage passengers.
Vibes.
Yeah, I feel like that was like, oh, keep cramming them in there. She also has a smoking room, dining room, and baggage room. So, for the time, obviously, she's a pretty big vessel for what she's doing. But in the grand scheme of things, she's not very large.
I'm imagining a gag, like an airplane movie type gag, where you're doing a tour of the ship and they have the smoking room and they open it and it's just on fire.
So she had a raised quarterdeck, which not only allowed for better visibility for the helmsman, but also space for passenger cabins. So she's built with a little bit of thought. She's not like mass produced, that kind of thing. Like this vessel is built with some thought, some intention, and like a purpose, actually.
Mm-hmm.
The hull of the vessel would feature 2 black stripes along a white hull, and she would be painted gray below the waterline while being accented in green and gold. So she sounds like a pretty visually striking vessel.
I love hearing these descriptions because so often these really old steamboats, you really only see them depicted in sketches that maybe came out of someone's journal. Mm-hmm. And so you very rarely see them depicted in color. And It's easy to imagine them not being in color. And just like everything before, the television age, imagining it happening in black and white.
Yeah, I really liked that. I really liked being able to get that visual of like the green and gold accent and stuff like that.
Is there a particular reason she was painted gray below the waterline?
I don't think so. Probably just whatever was handy and like...
Gotta paint it something?
Yeah, right.
Make it harder for Robert Fulton's submarine to see.
So she's powered by a single-cylinder engine that's built by Robert McQueen in New York City. And this engine would pack a whopping 73 horsepower.
Very cool.
All 73 of them horses.
Which, again, sounds paltry, but I mean, I feel like for the time, something with 73 horsepower is probably pretty impressive.
It's like you can have 73 horsepower or wind, your choice.
Because I know there's like a big difference, because they were using like stationary steam engines at the time that were pretty massive, but I would think that to have that much power in something that's on a vessel is probably pretty impressive for the time.
Right. Yeah. It's like kind of like we were talking a little bit before this. Like it's like the original iPhone. Like it's not impressive whatsoever now, but at the time,
It was
there was nothing else
pretty
like it.
cool.
Right. So this 73 horsepower engine would drive a 16-foot diameter paddle wheel. This engine is described as something you'd expect to see in a grist mill. It would be wood fired, and the primary wood used would be well seasoned pine. In total, like when operating at full speed, she would be able to sail between 6 and 10 miles per hour.
Heck yeah.
So yeah, like this is a pretty complicated setup. Like you can tell this is the first of its type. It's not commonplace yet.
If a person were to find themselves in the paddle wheel,
yes,
would they still die?
Slowly and eventually, but they would be rescued. It's my previous experience with this. I believe the word crushed was used.
I'm just imagining it like not turning fast enough to actually crush someone to death, but just like to horribly maim them.
That's pretty much what happened. Not in this one. Listen to one of our previous episodes. The Walk in the Water was notable as being the first steam-powered vessel to operate in the Great Lakes, as we mentioned. And the first captain would be Job Fish. However, he would be fired when he rammed a dock. In the process of doing so, it's reported that he was swearing and cursing through a megaphone, and he blamed the entire mishap on the engineering department of the ship. So he is a it's not my fault kind of guy.
This is like when the referees in the NFL, when they have their mic accidentally on, you get to hear everything in the discussion.
When they're just like, I don't know.
Through the megaphone.
Yeah, so he gets fired for that. They didn't like that.
For hitting the dock or for the swearing? Because I could see like either one getting you.
I just feel like it was the whole package, maybe, in that case. Maybe that helped them understand he wasn't the right guy to be in charge.
Well, when your parents name you Job, you know that you've got some bad luck coming your way.
So her maiden voyage would be August 25th, 1818. She would carry 29 passengers from Black Rock, New York, with stops in Dunkirk, New York, Erie, PA, Cleveland, Ohio, before finally finishing at her destination of Detroit, Michigan.
We just can't get away from the Spanish Armada. Here we are, back in Dunkirk.
I always like seeing what towns they go to, like at this time period, like in 1818. I don't even know what Dunkirk, New York is. It's clearly not a town that like boomed in the same way that like Erie even or somewhere like that did.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, obviously Cleveland and Detroit are pretty good examples of big lake towns, but
that's because they evacuated all the people on all those little boats.
That's right. So during this trip, trouble would soon become apparent, and that is that she was unable to exit the harbor due to the swift currents of the Niagara River. For those that aren't super familiar with American geography, Buffalo sits like at the very like eastern tip of Lake Erie, and it's kind of right next to Canada, separated by the river, right near Niagara Falls and everything. So this is a pretty swift moving river, and to overcome this, they have to rely on animal power. A team of 20 oxen are used to get the vessel moving. From James Croyle's Steam Navigation, its relation to the commerce of Canada and the United States. From 1898.
While she could navigate downstream, her power was not sufficient to make headway against the strong current of the Niagara River. Resort was therefore made to what was known in the early days as a horned breeze. The Walk in the Water was regularly towed up the Niagara River by a number of yokes of oxen, but once above the swift current, she went very well.
I can like already hear the oxen teamsters like talking about the steam engine and how useless it is, and it can't even like leave harbor on its own. Like, look at this stuff. It doesn't, it's useless.
I'm trying to think of what's one of the technologies that we make fun of right now.
Self-driving cars.
It was the self-driving car of its day. But yeah, I thought that was funny. You got this newfangled toy, and you still got to rely on Old Faithful, a team of 20 oxen.
Right. So she would depart Cleveland on September 1st, bound for Detroit. And the the ticket prices I found very interesting. It was $18 for a cabin and $9 for a bunk.
It's like attending a single A baseball game.
Yeah, basically $9 for a bleacher, 18 for like a seat back. So in September of 1818, she would actually run aground near Erie, PA. However, she would be repaired in 1819, and she was able to travel to Mackinac City, Michigan. From there, she would travel to your neck of the woods, and she would end up in Green Bay, Wisconsin. This trip is noteworthy that it's covered in the May issue of the New York Mercantile Advisor. I find it interesting that like people are tracking this thing. Like people want to know like where this vessel's going.
It's interesting to see the different demands placed on boats as they navigate different parts of the lake system, because we saw this, she couldn't even get out into the river on her own.
Mm-hmm.
Yet she's able to make it all the way from Detroit to Green Bay.
Mm-hmm.
So like that's a decent sized trip there that she's able to do.
So during this time, during her operation, she would carry many notable people, actually including General Winfield Scott, who's it's a pretty big name in the U.S. Army at this time.
Was he already a general at that point?
It may be calling him general in like the.
I feel like he was pretty low ranking because he was captured during the War of 1812. I think he was captured at Queenston Heights, and he was fairly young, maybe like a lieutenant or like a captain or something. But they easily could just be doing that because that's what people know his rank as.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I feel like he just exists like in any pre-Civil War, post-War of 1812, pre-Civil War stuff. I feel like he's like the man in the U.S. military. Another interesting role that she played is that she carried members of the U.S. Boundary Commission, led by General Peter Porter, and they're tasked with establishing the border between the U.S. and Canada under the Treaty of Ghent. What's the right way to say it?
Ghent is the normal way we say the city in Europe rather than the city in Kentucky.
I was about to say, I only know the Kentucky pronunciation. So beginning in 1820, they worked with a British team to map, chart, and allocate border territories, particularly the islands and the lakes and rivers that were dividing the two nations. This has to be an interesting time because like the War of 1812 was pretty fresh. Here's like U.S. officers working with British officers. It has to be interesting.
Yeah, it is a fascinating time, especially reading about that because you've got these teams working together. They're measuring depths in the rivers and lakes and stuff, deciding where to draw these boundaries because, they're working from maps that are maybe relatively old or they were never really done in any detailed fashion before. Mm-hmm. So when you have the Treaty of Ghent, you've got, people agreeing on here's the boundary in areas where like no one really knows what is exactly there or like what they're dividing up. And so then they kind of retroactively have to go and see, okay, what did we give you? What did we get out of this? And then there even comes up a couple times where maybe there's like a small group of islands and like one big island. And it's like, hey, okay, you guys take this and we get these three little ones. And it's just kind of bartering over these things. And this is where like Isle Royale becomes American, rather than part of Canada.
Yeah, you see some interesting quirks when you start looking along that boundary line, especially through like the lakes and everything. Like there's some like you kind of want to know like, well, why does this like jaunt up like this right here? Or like why is this island Canadian, not American?
One of those actually involved on the Canadian side is David Thompson, who our Explorer fans probably know. This is kind of late in his career. After he's done most of the stuff he's famous for, but he's one of the people who's involved in doing these surveys.
Yeah, that was a name that definitely jumped out, thanks especially to the song, I suppose. So the commission would spend a good deal of time around Detroit, and while there, of course, they would enjoy the vibrant social life that Detroit has to offer. It was probably more vibrant then than it is now.
A lot less teams to watch.
Yeah, I mean, you think they were like getting box seats at the Pistons game, or how was that working? So, quoting from Francis M. Carroll's The Search for the Canadian-American Boundary.
The high point was the celebration of the 4th of July. At 10 a.m., a large party of gentlemen and ladies, including Governor Lewis Cass, Mrs. Cass, and General Alexander Macomb, boarded the steamboat Walk in the Water for an excursion down the river. Salutes were fired, a military band played, dances were held, and a festive dinner was provided.
Do you think the British guys were celebrating the 4th of July with them?
Maybe in the same way that, like, if there's a holiday going on when you visit another country, maybe you're like, why not?
It'd be like me celebrating Boxing Day. It's like, I don't know what we're doing, but we're boxing.
Or if there's like a specific holiday in Vietnam that they celebrate kicking out the Americans, I guess it would be like celebrating that.
I mean, I'll eat a banh mi. I don't care. We'll celebrate.
I don't need an excuse to do that.
yeah. I already do that. I like banh mi. One of the Americans present for this is actually Reverend Jedediah Morse, who is the father of Samuel Morse.
Sweet.
Yeah. However, he is known more in his own right as a geographer.
Sure he is.
It's interesting, all these connections, like, to famous and powerful people. Like, there weren't that many people back in the day.
Yeah, it's just cool to see like how many people cross paths, even in just like minor ways.
Mm-hmm.
The degrees of separation here.
Yeah, I feel like we're like 1 degree removed from like Samuel Morse to Winfield Scott. So regarding the area growing up around Detroit, one commission member wrote,
"The rivers Detroit and St. Clair have a lively fringe of comfortable and even pretty dwellings, embowered in pear, apple, and peach orchards, with here and there a church tower or a clump of wych elms, shadowing an advanced bank of the river. Productive farms stretch out of sight into the woods behind."
Carroll continues on to say,
Although Detroit still had something of the atmosphere of a fur trade post or garrison town, it was poised for rapid growth. The appearance in 1818 of the Walk in the Water, the first steamboat on Lake Erie, together with the opening of the Erie Canal in 1825, made Michigan, Wisconsin, and Illinois accessible in a dramatic fashion.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. Like, they're directly talking about how this vessel is allowing for I don't want to say the settling of this like frontier, but I mean, that's essentially what's going on, right? Is the movement of people and goods, further west. And it's just not possible to be done to the same degree without vessels like this.
Right.
I think, that's really comparable to the role that the railroads play with westward expansion eventually, in 50 years.
This is a little bit before the Moselle, but I'm thinking about the conversation we had in that episode about there the focus is on speed, leading to all these steamboat boiler explosions and accidents. But it's interesting how those two things are tied together, how the machinery, the technology is tied together with this American. It really is a cog in the machine of manifest destiny.
Mm-hmm.
This is empowering the American urge to move westward and take over more territory. And that's less possible without technology like this.
Yeah, like, I feel like it's really easy to keep those things separate when you're just learning about them, but like, everything is a product of its time. Like, there wouldn't be this much innovation going into this if there wasn't a benefit for it.
Yeah, all of those things, the steamboat, the repeating rifle, barbed wire, even, you could think about.
Anyway, back to our vessel. She would serve without major incident until November 1st, 1821. At the time, she would be commanded by Captain J. Rogers. I believe the J is Jebediah, so that's a fun one. At the time, she'd be carrying 18 passengers. She's en route from Buffalo to Detroit, Michigan. Captain Rogers had set out around 4 p.m. on October 31st and proceeded towards Detroit. So we're in that time of year in the Great Lakes when things aren't great. We're really right there in like the middle of it, transitioning from October to November.
Right in the sweet spot.
Yes, it is not a time I would want to be on any of the lakes.
Not on an old rickety steamboat.
No.
It's not rickety at the time, but it seems so in retrospect.
She'll get rickety, don't worry. As the day wore on, conditions deteriorated quickly. I'm just going to keep that phrase like in every note that I do. I feel like that's a phrase I say every time.
It does come up probably 80% of our episodes.
Yeah, I want to be like, and then the weather got bad. So as the vessel approached Point Abino, about 11 miles west of Buffalo on the Canadian side of the lake, gale force winds were in full effect. So it truly does deteriorate pretty quick. They are not that far out of port. Late in the evening, it becomes apparent that the vessel was in trouble. Captain Rogers realizes this, and he does the smart thing. He tries to position the vessel to better ride out the storm. We've talked about that before, how you can position the vessel to take waves better so you're not having them break over the ship constantly. He's trying to do that. However, it's obvious that they don't have the power to do that, and he makes a decision to return to Buffalo. Probably the right move.
I'm assuming that if she struggles with even a calm day on a strong river current, then a storm out on the lakes is probably not something that she can really battle through.
Yeah, there's just not a lot of extra power beyond what she can, muster just to try to move forward.
I don't even know if did we even talk about, is she a stern wheeler?
Side wheeler.
Oh, okay.
She's a side wheeler. I believe a lot of these bigger ones at the time were side wheelers, whereas the stern wheelers were more river type boats. I believe. I am not an expert on steamboats, though.
Yeah, because I know with the stern wheelers, there was always the issue of taking waves on the stern because it's mostly open.
Right. So Captain Rogers decided to make his way back to Buffalo's city pier, even though the Buffalo main lighthouse is not visible due to the raging storm. So he's kind of trying to do this blind, but he knows the general direction where they need to go. At 10 p.m., the vessel would drop 3 anchors. However, this did not have the intended effect, and the vessel would take a violent plunge and begin to take water. So these anchors actually caused the vessel to take some waves that she wouldn't have otherwise taken. This action caused the already damaged vessel to take on even more water. Kind of the thing we've seen in a few of our stories now. The vessel's just getting beaten apart by the waves. It's just, she's not able to take this kind of damage. The vessel has all of her pumps engaged. However, her anchors are still dragging, and the vessel is beginning to obviously drift. And remember, they're moving back towards the port. So all of a sudden now you have a land issue. You don't really want to be drifting, especially when you don't know where you are. The captain is well aware now that the walk in the water is in an extremely dangerous situation. As a result of this, the decision is made to attempt to reach shore and beach the vessel. Throughout the ordeal, passengers appeared to place a good deal of trust in Captain Rogers. An excerpt from the account of Mary Witherill Palmer gives one such instance.
Most of the passengers were calm. One instance of coolness I remember, Mr. Thurston, when requested to go on deck and prepare for the worst, replied, "No, I have great faith in Captain Rogers. He promised to land me in Cleveland, and I know that he will do it." He wrapped his cloak around him and lay down on a settee.
He's definitely not getting you to Cleveland. Sorry about that. What's a settee? Is it a couch?
It's like a little bench.
Okay. We should bring that back. I like that.
I think people still have them, but just fancy people.
Oh.
It's the kind of thing you'd probably find at an antique village.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure someone's got an old little settee. I mean, the ones they make now look basically just you'd probably just call it a little couch.
Okay. Now I want to go to Antique Village.
Yeah, see if you can find one.
So after hours of effort, Captain Rogers ordered passengers to the deck so that no one would risk being trapped below if the vessel suddenly grounded. Smart move. You're getting everyone in position to, rescue themselves if they have to, essentially. Next, the crew would cut the anchors, and they would allow the gale force winds to push the vessel towards the shore. So, cutting those anchors, that at this point you're kind of giving up and letting the wind and the waves do their thing. But at least kind of more where you're going to go versus the anchor dragging and, not being predictable. The vessel would continue to drift in the darkness until she hit the beach near the main Buffalo lighthouse. From Palmer.
The chain cable was slipped and the 2 hempen ones cut. Drifting before the gale, the walk in the water, in about a half an hour, grazed the beach. The next swell let her down with a crash of crockery and glass, and the third, lifting her farther up the shore, fixed her immovably in the sand. The swells made a clean breach over the decks. Some of the ladies were in their nightclothes, and all were repeatedly drenched.
So after grounding, as we here in this account, a large swell picks up the vessel and tosses her down. This would fracture the keel in several places. And, at that point, it basically dooms this vessel to destruction. However, they're kind of exactly where they want to be.
And also, I guess with this story, it's kind of a different setup. We talked about them cutting the cables so that they would be pushed towards shore.
Mm-hmm.
Very different from what we've seen, obviously, with Spanish Armada in Ireland and with the Cazador last week, where you do kind of have the luxury of coming ashore somewhere that seems like it's a lot sandier and softer to come ashore rather than a rocky coastline.
Yeah, this just feels like they're extremely lucky. Like everything kind of is going right at this point for them to, if you're going to have to do this is the way you want to do it. The Cleveland Weekly Herald would describe the ordeal in its November 13th, 1821 edition.
From the time she commenced dragging her anchors until she went ashore, the scene must have been truly awful. From the darkness of the night, it was impossible to tell how far they were from shore, and they were also apprehensive of being stranded on the rocks. The torrents of rain, the whistling of the wind, the dashing of the waters, and the constant croaking and rocking of the ship conspired to render the scene beyond description. Everyone on board with whom we have conversed speak in the highest terms of the master, Captain J. Rogers, whose calmness and persevering endeavors to save the boat excited the admiration of all.
Yeah, it's pretty constant, the praise he gets. It sounds like he truly does. He continually puts the vessel in the best possible position it can be in, and he gets, things break his way in this. And I feel like so often we see it not work out that way, where, something just doesn't work the way it's supposed to. And in this case, they truly get lucky in this scenario.
Yeah, and one of those things being that they're close enough and they're in the right area where they can just beach the vessel and take the lifeboats out of the equation, because that, who knows how many people die if they have to get in lifeboats here.
Exactly. So due to the severe weather and darkness, passengers and crew who were able to get off the vessel didn't really have a good idea of where they were. Fortunately, it's discovered that the vessel had beached itself in an almost ideal location. Survivors were able to reach the lighthouse, where they are able to gather around the fireplace for warmth. So again, everything's going right. We'll visit Palmer again here.
Ashore, we found ourselves about a mile above the lighthouse in a dismal plight. Thankful for the preservation of our lives. In company with a Mr. Calhoun, who was engineer of the steamer, I ran to the lighthouse. After the lapse of so long a time, it seems to me that I almost flew along the beach. My exhilaration was so great. The lighthouse keeper, anticipating wrecks or disasters, I think signal guns had been fired during the night on board, had a roaring fire in his huge fireplace, by which we remained until carriages came down for us from Buffalo.
Yeah, it just seems like everything falls into place here. Everyone's ready, everyone's doing their job. It's nice to see.
Everything down to even having a roaring fire ready to go. I mean, because the lighthouse keeper knows that this is a problem. He knows that there's a ship in distress. Yeah, literally everything down to the last detail seems like it has gone right.
I mean, the first, can you imagine, you go through this ordeal, you're shipwrecked, you get to the lighthouse, you sit by the fire, and then it's two creams and a sugar in your coffee? Is that what you wanted? It's very different than most of the stories we talk about. So one of these funny little quirks in history is that Mary Palmer was on the first voyage of the Walk in the Water, and she would actually be on her last. The Palmers returned to Detroit by wagon via Canada over the course of the next couple weeks after the disaster. It's interesting seeing this happen in what was really, really recently, quote, enemy territory.
It is. And it's also interesting just how relatively quickly the US and Britain go from, fighting two wars to, in hindsight, it seems like almost immediately just flipping a switch and suddenly, hey, we're friends now. But yeah, it's interesting to think about, what is this, 1821? How, less than a decade before this, it's this is territory that's being fought over.
The Cleveland Weekly Herald would write about the loss of the vessel on November 6th, 1821.
Steamboat lost. Information was received in town last evening that the steamboat Walk in the Water, Captain Rogers, was driven ashore near the Buffalo Lighthouse during the gale on Wednesday night last, and materially injured, if not totally lost. The passengers, about 40 in number, and crew were saved. We have obtained no particulars, and those mentioned may prove incorrect, although there is much reason to believe they are well-founded.
I just like this quote, this clip from the newspaper, because it's interesting seeing the newspaper be like, I don't know, it could all be wrong. We don't know.
I saw someone share a clip the other day from a news article that was like, the first line was, "There are no facts to support this, but."
I feel like that's when in like 12th grade composition class, your teacher's like, see me after class, please.
Yeah.
But yeah, it is interesting that the newspaper's like, I don't know, it could actually be they all 40 drowned. Like, these stories have a way of flipping around, at the time.
Yeah, keeping expectations realistic.
So the loss of the vessel was estimated to be between $10,000 and $20,000. I'm not sure if like maybe the 10 is just the vessel and the 20 is like including cargo and like personal possessions.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not quite sure. But it is, again, it's just nice to know that like that's the biggest problem here. Like the biggest problem is that the vessel's gone and someone needs some money. We don't have the body count that some of these other stories have. A final interesting anecdote from Mary Palmer is when the couple was still in Buffalo after the incident.
The day after we got back to Buffalo, Captain Rogers called upon me, and in the course of conversation, told me that his assurances to us of safety during the storm were anything but heartfelt. That during the gale he had secured the boat's papers on his person, thinking that should the boat and he be lost, his body would be washed ashore and they would be recovered.
It's a really good example of the captain keeping passengers assured while mentally preparing for the worst. Like he just seems like a guy who's able to handle this. Like we see so many people that aren't. They want to be a captain, but they don't want to do captain things when it comes time to do captain things. And this guy just isn't that. He's like fully prepared to go down with this ship and make that his priority to be like, I need to save as many people as I can.
And I like the transparency of telling them afterwards, hey, that was bullshit.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of times when you look at these disaster situations, it's amazing that like the most successful people, like they are scared. They're just able to channel that. I mean, I'm sure if you talk to like Captain Sully, he was scared when that was going on, but he knows what to do and how to respond.
Well, and especially like dealing with the ocean and the Great Lakes, it's like you should be a little bit scared here, because if you're not, then that's how accidents happen.
Yeah, and I think like the best way I've seen it described by people is like you always have to have respect for it.
Mm-hmm.
It's maybe not always being scared of it, but it is like you have to respect the lake. The job that you're doing is a dangerous one. It's really refreshing to see a captain that like he does his job. As
a semi-related note, but talking about having respect for the water and what it can do, it's like we saw that very tragic story a couple of days ago of that kid, the cruise ship, diving overboard on a dare or whatever. And it's like, yeah, don't get in the water unless you absolutely have to.
And yeah, don't jump off a cruise ship. That's bad.
Yeah.
So the Walk in the Water would eventually be salvaged at the site of the wreck. Her engines would be repurposed for use in the Steamboat Superior, which was built as a replacement for the Walk in the Water. These engines would actually be repurposed yet again for a sawmill in Saginaw City, Michigan. So it's interesting that these, kind of older steam engines like this they originated in like mills and things like that. These engines would eventually return to a mill to end their life. And finally, on March 3rd, 1989, the Postal Service issued a stamp commemorating the Walk in the Water. So I thought that was kind of interesting that there is a little bit of a commemoration of it. Nothing recently, but I guess the Postal Service was looking for ideas in 1989.
Cool. I'm sure they just had a ship nerd working for them. And
they probably did.
Anybody got ideas for our next stamp?
It's like, here, we could do these random flowers or this boat. I don't care which one.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, a very interesting story. An interesting time in American/Canadian history of kind of seeing how some of this Western migration happens. And there's just a lot going on at this point. But it's also nice to see a story where things work out. We've seen a lot of stories, a lot of bravery, a lot of, captains and crew. We joke about, captains not doing their job, but most of the time they do. Mm-hmm. Most of these guys are trying to do the best that they can. it's nice to see one work out for the kind of best possible scenario. It's refreshing.
And back with our conversation, kind of placing this in the context of history, it's Walk in the Water kind of plays a small role in it, but it kind of is representative of this time where suddenly the US and Britain / Canada start a long string of working together. The lakes are getting demilitarized. That's no longer an international standoff flashpoint. That's a area where ships are going to be operating from both sides. Some of the agreements they work out is basically, hey, we can use the channels on the Canadian side of this, and Canadian British shipping can use the channels on the American side of these islands. And there's those trade-offs, and you start to see that working together rather than the animosity that's been there for decades up to this point.
Yeah, I think you're seeing like sort of a codifying of the boundaries, but also that idea that like what's better for everyone if we can work together a little bit in this, that what's good for Buffalo is also good for, whatever's going on the Canadian side.
Whatever they've got over there on the other side.
Yeah. Whatever they're doing over there in Hamilton and St. Catharines, probably playing hockey. But this is one of my favorite time periods to like learn about, I feel like. And it's just so interesting. It's a fun one. I'm glad we could talk about this one today.
Yeah, it's cool. I learned a lot here.
Yeah, for sure. So hope you guys enjoyed it too. Feel free to check out that Patreon content. Like we said earlier, it's good stuff. There's a lot of good things in there. Send us an email, give us a review. We like all those things. We like hearing from you. So be in touch. Hang out on Twitter with us. We're pretty frequent posters. Have a great weekend. Have a great week. And we will talk to you next week. Thanks for listening.